Hello, welcome to Cine-dreamzzz. Today we're going to be looking at the 2007 horror film I Am Legend. Directed by Francis Lawrence, who was fresh off the success of his previous film Constantine. The story follows Robert Neville, a scientist played by Will Smith, who appears to be the last man left in New York City after a devastating virus wipes out most of humanity. By day, Neville roams the abandoned streets, scavenging for supplies, hunting for food with his dog, a German shepherd called Sam. But by night, he locks himself inside his fortified home, because that's when the infected, once human, now aggressive, light-sensitive creatures emerge and take over the city. Through a memory of his wife and daughter, we learn Neville is an army virologist. Neville clings to routine to stay sane, broadcasting daily radio messages in the hope that other survivors might hear him, whilst also experimenting on infected rats to find a cure. While hunting a deer, Sam pursues it into a dark building which is populated with the infected. Narrowly escaping, it gives Neville the opportunity to capture a female infected for use as a human subject for his experiments. The experiment proves unsuccessful. One day, Neville notices a mannequin placed outside Grand Central Terminal. As he approaches it, he's caught in a trap and loses consciousness. Neville frees himself, and the alpha infected unleashes infected dogs. Neville subdues the dogs, but Sam is bitten. Back in his lab, Neville injects her with a serum to no avail. Sam begins to transform, and Neville has to take the difficult decision to strangle her. In revenge, Neville assaults the Darkseekers with his car, but he's vastly outnumbered. He's rescued by immune survivors Anna and Ethan, who heard this broadcast. Neville clashes with Anna over her religious beliefs, while Neville's beliefs are firmly rooted in scientific facts. Meanwhile, the infected Darkseekers have discovered Neville's home and attacked the compound. Down in the basement, the female test subject seems to be responding well to being kept cold whilst the cure takes effect. But the Darkseekers, led by the Alpha, break into the lab, which forces Neville to sacrifice himself to save Anna and Ethan. Now, there was actually another ending that was tested unfavourably with the audience. Neville gives the infected girl back to the Alpha, which suggests that's why they invaded the house all along. It's much more interesting, and it's in the spirit of the novel. So, listen, I Am Legend is half decent as an action horror. Will Smith gives a passionate performance, and his relationship with his dog Sam does play the heartstrings, but it's deeply flawed and it's a huge missed opportunity. One of the most frustrating things about I Am Legend is how well it understands tension right up until the point it completely breaks it. The opening stretch is genuinely gripping, it's brilliant. For nearly 25 minutes the film holds back. It lets the emptiness of New York do the heavy lifting. You're not seeing the infected, you're imagining them. There's this creeping dread that builds and builds because the film trusts restraint. I remember watching this in the cinema when I was 17. I was completely locked in. The atmosphere had me. The loneliness, the unease, the sense that something was just out of sight and it was working exactly the way a horror film should. And then you see them. The moment the infected are fully revealed, the illusion just collapses. The CGI doesn't hold up. Even back then, it didn't. And I remember thinking that, sitting there in the cinema, they could have done this better. For me, the spell was broken in real time. And then the monsters, when they're revealed, look like they're from cutscenes in Resident Evil. I mean, come on. Even if you put makeup on Phil Mitchell, it would have been better than this.
No, I'm gonna get you where others in. I'm gonna bring you down. I'm gonna take everything you've got away.
Once you stop believing what you're seeing, you're no longer in the story. You're aware of the filmmaking in the worst possible way. Now, I think that's where my love-hate relationship with CGI started. Not CGI as a tool, but CGI when it replaces smarter, more tactile filmmaking. When it comes at the expense of movie magic. I don't disagree with using this technique to portray a broken down New York City. In these moments, the CGI works well, and it fulfills the illusion of the story. But there are so many ways that this could have worked better. Use actors in makeup. Keep the creatures in shadow. Use close-ups, partial reveals, fragmented shots. Techniques that hide limitations instead of exposing them. The film already proves it knows how to do this in the first act, but instead, in the second and third act it shows everything, and what it shows isn't convincing. For me, the immersion was gone. and once the illusion breaks, it's incredibly hard to get back. It's a mad one with this film because the history of the production is really interesting. Back in the mid-90s, Ridley Scott was signed on to direct. He spent months developing a script with actors like Tom Cruise and even Arnold Schwarzenegger, who were attached to star in it. Ultimately, this version never materialised, but imagine how interesting that would have been. Another layer of frustration for me comes from how far I Am Legend strays from its source material novel, because the novel isn't just different, it's richer, darker, and far more thought-provoking. In the book, the infected aren't just mindless creatures. They're divided into two distinct groups: the undead vampires, violent, bloodthirsty, almost animalistic, and then the living vampires, who retain intelligence, structure, and eventually begin forming a new society. For years, Neville has been killing both, not even realising that there's a difference. That alone adds a moral complexity that the film completely strips away. In the book, written by Richard Matheson, Neville himself is a much more flawed and fascinating character. He's not just a determined scientist, he's an anti-hero, an alcoholic driven half mad by isolation and desire, constantly tormented by the vampires outside his home. There's moments where young female vampires try to lure him out, exploiting his loneliness. It's disturbing, psychological, and deeply human in a way the film barely touches. And then there's Ruth. Neville meets her, connects with her, even becomes intimate with her, only to grow suspicious that she might be infected. But when he tries to test her, she turns the tables, incapacitates him, and reveals the truth. She's part of this new society of living vampires. A society that sees Neville not as a survivor, but as a monster. A hunter who's been slaughtering their kind in their sleep. Neville's captured, sentenced to execution by this new society, and ultimately takes his own life using pills that Ruth gave him. It's tragic, but it's also poetic. He realises that he has become the legend, the thing that they fear. Not the hero, but the last remnant of a dying world. The book even gives us a central antagonist in Ben Portman, an undead vampire who repeatedly calls out to Neville, taunting him, creating this eerie personal rivalry. Portman becomes a symbol of everything Neville hates and fears, and their dynamic adds tension that runs throughout the entire story. None of this is in the film. Instead, the vampires are reduced to largely mindless zombie-like creatures. That layered mythology, that moral ambiguity, that shift in perspective, it's all gone. And to make it worse, what replaces it is heavily reliant on CGI that, especially in the third act, just doesn't hold up. So not only does the film simplify the concept, it then undermines it further with visuals that break the illusion. It's a real shame because the potential here was huge. The source material had the depth, the horror, and the thematic weight to create something truly special, and the film just doesn't fully realise that. I also think this highlights a bigger issue when it comes to horror filmmaking in general. Sometimes limitations are your greatest strength. Very much so in horror, what you don't show is often far more effective than what you do. Writing a screenplay that embraces visual limitations can actually enhance tension, because it forces you to rely on atmosphere, suggestion, and clever filmmaking rather than just showing everything outright. We already had proof that this worked. Just 5 years earlier, 28 Days Later showed how terrifying infected humans could be without relying on heavy CGI. It used performance, camera work, and raw energy to create something that felt immediate and real. That's the difference. When you ground horror in something tangible, even if it's limited, it feels believable. So that's going to do it for this episode of Cine-dreamzzz. If you like the videos, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as always, don't forget your popcorn. See you next time.